Well, I'm not a crook.
Crooked Hillary.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president.
We're not going to let the media intimidate us into exploring whether or not these contests were fairly had.
Which I won, by the way, but, we'll find that out. Vote.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Elections, the core of any democracy. The difference between a true democracy and a thinly veiled dictatorship is election security and transparency. The U.S. prides itself on its election system, touting its ability to preserve freedom. What happens when corruption and lust for power lead to attempted election interference and fraud?
On June 17, 1972, reports of an attempted break-in at the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. spread across local authorities and underwent federal investigation. Through further investigation, the U.S. Senate, Watergate Committee, and various investigative reporters gathered several pieces of evidence, including stolen confidential documents and bugged office phones, pointing to the Nixon Committee to re-elect the president, the CRP. Initially unable to be linked, Richard Nixon maintained public support and trust, continuing his campaign for re-election, where he successfully won his second presidential term in November 1972.
Through various investigations into Watergate, an even larger conspiracy was born. Connections were drawn between Watergate and not only the CRP, but also a number of Nixon's top aides. Nixon maintained his innocence as his usage of political sabotage became public knowledge. Nixon employed a group of aides who he called plumbers. Their job was to stop leaks to the press and public, as Nixon had become increasingly paranoid after the leaking of the Pentagon Papers earlier in his presidency. The exposure of Nixon's unscrupulous technique continued as the Supreme Court forced him to release his personal recordings and all of his phone calls during the presidency. Eventually, in 1974, the pressure mounted. With impeachment imminent, Nixon resigned.
What America witnessed in the crime of Nixon was an abuse of presidential power with the deliberate obstruction of justice, developing strong national feelings of cynicism and distrust.
Hello. Do you know whether or not any other instances where raw files of the FBI have been turned over to committees of Congress?
I know that there have been some summary files turned over.
I mean raw files.
Raw files.
These are raw files.
No, but let me check with somebody who will have an answer right off the top.
You call the FBI and tell them I want that in 3 minutes. I'll have it there to have their ass, and they'll have it over here, or I'll fire the whole goddamn bureau. I mean that. All right? You get right a hold of them. All right.
Watergate echoes a development in the modern U.S., an increasingly distrustful public, wary of election fraud. But are we simply seeing a societal paranoia and election scandals akin to Watergate? Or are we witnessing something more?
Moving towards the current era of the 21st century, Republican Donald Trump has become a magnet for election scandals, attracting the American public attention towards issues of U.S. elections, specifically at the presidential level. From 2016 to 2024, Trump largely shifted public sentiment of voting policies and regulations, developing into the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2020.
Trump has been both the accused and the accuser in matters of election security. From the Mueller report to suing Nevada, Trump has already claimed that the 2024 election will be rigged against him. In the 2020 election, Trump claimed he had won despite the votes definitively going to Joe Biden. Trump claimed that dead people had voted. Trump votes were thrown out, and votes had been counted multiple times. These claims led not only to Trump supporting members of the public, but high-level government officials to cry election fraud.
The controversy surrounding the Watergate and the malicious action taken by President Richard Nixon instigated further belief of political corruption occurring inside American democracy. Following the incident, the Senate established a select committee on presidential campaign activities, positioning North Carolina Democrat Senator Ervin as the chairman investigating the 1972 presidential election campaigns. Several testimonies were gathered from trials, including Richard Nixon, John Dean, and H.R. Haldeman, in their knowledge of the Watergate scandal. Although Senator Ervin stated the illegal activities happening inside the Watergate scandal including the tapping of telephones, publication of forged documents, and opposing political organizations. They attempted to dismiss and deny the idea that the three played any role in the Watergate process.
Nixon's aides and the burglars were all indicted, and while Nixon was not indicted, the evidence against him was handed up to the House of Representatives, and shortly after, Nixon resigned. Watergate and Nixon's resignation shook the public. It was present in pop culture, the next election, and especially in the minds of the public. After Watergate, only 30% trusted in government, a staggering change from the 77% under John F. Kennedy. The 1960 election between Richard Nixon and JFK was close enough, so Nixon had legal ground to challenge several states, but somewhat ironically chose to put a united country over his own self-interest and not challenge the election results.
Although there are several examples that the two presidents acted upon for the good of the nation, current public trust in the government hollows out to a measly 15%. This significant gap in decreased confidence represents the growth of presidential partisanship in comparison between Republicans Donald Trump and Richard Nixon. The exposure of modernization by hidden tactics within the election process largely contributes to future distrust by public sentiment, guiding for a downfall in democracy and tranquility. Among one of the larger evidences gathered to debunk political fallacies within parties includes the hidden Nixon tapes that were gathered and were periodically recorded during the second presidential term of Richard Nixon. Within the compilation of the Nixon tapes, the public became open to discovery about the large power that a president could hold, and how conditions in the White House are mitigated when broadcasted towards the American public. As our world has become more technologically advanced, social media has increased to play large roles in social feelings and public attitudes in popularities of news, polls, and online discussions.
During the 2020 election, former President Donald Trump often claimed that the upcoming election might be rigged against him, causing many of his followers to become even more skeptical of the election process. On election day, Trump began to lead as predicted, but by the end of the night, Joe Biden had won the thing. One, thanks to many mail-in ballots coming in later than expected.
Similarly, Nixon and Trump's presidential runs during their election campaigns involved democratic breaches of the election process. Where the 1972 election involved Watergate, during the 2016 election, the allowed interference of Russian coordinated influence accounts, creating political issues of foreign influence. In future U.S. elections, largely both candidates were from the Republican Party, supporting strong ideas of conservatism, and were both indicted for actions in their own elections. However, both are different in their extent of corrupt election, where Watergate was a political crime that was misused and that misused government agencies for political purposes, while Trump's actions of allowing foreign interference at a similar scale. Nixon admitted to his wrongdoing, leading to his resign on August 9, 1974, while Trump maintains his innocence and continues to participate in the presidential elections. Although there is a resemblance between Nixon and Trump in their actions during the presidential elections, both presidents serve as an example of further election scandals that may occur in the future. In understanding the story of Watergate, we can create implications that such actions will continue to happen during elections may have also gone unnoticed. The dire need for stronger security and impartial voting processes for elections must be considered in order to prevent greater extents in future mishaps that contravene the fundamental basis in the first article of the U.S. Constitution.
When compared to Nixon's crimes, Trump's calls of election fraud and the potential Russian collusion in the 2016 election are a new high for the country, in that now not only are more people distrustful of government after these fiascos, but people in the election process are becoming increasingly harassed. They're often they're being sued. A major thing that is different from how Nixon's actions, while repugnable, were not on the level of public scale They were much more isolated attacks on individuals or a greater party, rather than inciting an insurrection or calling upon election results to be completely altered. When comparing the two, it's clear that Donald Trump's actions have brought a new change to our country, and will continue to bring that change, and it's much more severe than those of Watergate.
Who am I interviewing today?
Ben Barty.
Year did you start voting?
Let's see, so I voted about 2 years ago, so that'd be 2022.
Did you have like any opinions or feelings about the 2016 or 2020 election?
Yeah, let's start getting controversial. Say Donald Trump should have won the 2021. Simply because, first off, he did get more votes, and I think there were some miscountings.
Here, who are you gonna vote for president?
Alright, so right now, I only got two options really, Biden and Trump. Who can actually run a country? Biden's too old, but Trump is also old. But Trump does not have dementia, so I would just pick Trump.
In the future, will you still continue to vote no matter like what happens during these elections?
Alright, this is where my funny answer shows up. Voting invokes my right to complain.
Yeah.
So yes, I plan to vote.
You will?
I like complaining.
Okay. And in final thought, how do you think America will turn out for presidential elections in the future?
Very hard to say. We're constantly changing. And honestly, I don't know who's going to win, the guy with dementia or the guy who can run a country who has also done bad things, but there's bad things on both sides of the spectrum, so it depends on who's less bad.
Okay, thank you.
Do you think, let's go a while back, do you think 50 years ago, do you think we are doing better as a whole on elections and public outreach about elections than 50 years ago?
We being the government and the systems of processing, votes and collecting them, yes, I do. It's a more complex time. There's a lot more people. I mean, we're 2.25 million people now, for example, in King County. Not all those are voters. That's total population. 50 years ago, it might have been 500,000 people, and I remember as a little kid going into the gym of my elementary school, and they had big voting machines. They were the size of a closet. You'd have to wheel in, and going with my dad behind the curtain, and you'd click little tabs, to vote. And then later we had little systems with a little poker, and you punch out on the chads. So I think that we're doing better in the system. It's a very good system. I think that, whether voting Americans are more engaged civically than 50 years ago and more aware in terms of the news and the issues, maybe less so in a lot of cases. There's a lot of factors as to why that is. A lot of people feel that the system doesn't work for them, that they've been left out, that it's for powerful and wealthy folks. And it can be pretty discouraging. You can say, what difference does it make if I participate? I think there's a lot of misinformation now out there. It used to have 3 trusted network news channels where the vast majority of Americans got their news every night at 6 o'clock, from Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw of NBC News, Chet Huntley, some of those older fellas. Now, with the internet and social media, there's literally millions of sources of news and fake news. And, it's hard. I think sometimes it's hard to be truly informed as to what facts are, just for mischievous purposes, foreign countries or even domestic folks that want to mislead, use these telephones to kind of disrupt the body politic. That's the kind of stuff I don't like, and I don't think it's fair. And in a lot of ways, it's just, it disenfranchises people. And if there's something that's fundamental to the success of this country and the values we share, it's that you have a say in who governs you, and you get to have that say at the ballot box. And it should be accessible, and it shouldn't be played with. It's not a game, And then once you cast that vote, it's sacred.
Yeah, that makes sense.